The ruffian, son of a high-ranking noble family who reigns over the academy like a king, reads a letter exposing his sin of dishonesty. The letter states that, due to his wrongful actions during the Holy Sylvania Academy's entrance examination, he is being removed from the family register. Ed realizes that the god of fate is mocking him. Moments later, he is expelled from the academy with all his belongings, fully understanding that it is the end for him. Rumors about Ed spread like wildfire. The students quickly learn that he has been disowned, and as he empties his dorm room, it becomes clear that no one will see him next semester. Whispers among the students echo that he shouldn't have rigged the entrance exam in the first place, branding him a filthy noble. Our boy, however, feels the situation is completely unfair. The arrogant Ed Roththaler everyone despises isn't even him. He has somehow found himself inside a game based on Sylvania Academy, the magical school from his favorite game, The Failed Swordsman of Sylvania. Usually, when someone is transported into a game-based world, they become the first son of a chaebol, a genius ruffian, a young clan master, or an SSS rank hunter who breaks all the rules. But fate, it seems, had something entirely different in store for him. Out of all the abilities he could have received, our boy ends up as a third-rate villain who gets kicked out of the dorms at the very beginning of the game. Stuck with the worst character at the worst possible time, he calls it completely unfair. He struggles to believe his predicament, especially since he has always lived a frugal and simple life, free of greed. The passing children, overhearing his complaints, misinterpret his words. They assume he's lamenting his situation despite all the wrongs he has done and mock him, calling him shameless. "Get away from us," they sneer. Checking his stats, our boy begins to understand why Ed Roththaler is considered the worst character. Despite being enrolled in the Faculty of Magic, his intellect is pitifully low, and his stamina is abysmal, even by noble standards. His stats are atrocious, making it clear why Ed was originally just a third-rate, trampy villain meant to appear briefly in the early scenarios of the game. Adding to his woes, Ed realizes that his memories are hazy at best. He can barely recall his past, and his recollections are fragmented and incomplete. However, one thing suddenly comes back to him: the ending credits of the game. His character was depicted as a beggar, a complete bum with no direction in life. He understands now that it was no surprise. Ed Roththaler, after all, was nothing more than a ruffian, clueless about the world around him. So, he was bound to end up begging after being thrown onto the streets. It's lucky that his character is even alive. Our boy questions why he was given such a terrible body to inhabit. He doesn't know the reason, and there's no way to find out either, but he refuses to let that be his ending. Determined, he decides to make the best of his situation, no matter what. Sylvania Academy is not just a school. It's more akin to a city, with the entire Arcane Mountain serving as its vast premises. To escape the prying eyes of other students, he heads to the northeast of the academy, into an undeveloped forest. After walking for half a day, he finally has the time to process the situation he's in. It dawns on him that his character's disownment marks the extreme starting point of the scenario. Fortunately, while his family has cast him aside, he hasn't been expelled from the academy itself, a crucial silver lining. Sylvania Academy is a top-tier institution, and graduating from it guarantees a secure future. As long as the game's events remain centered within the academy, he knows he can leverage the extensive knowledge he's gained as a 5-time dedicated player of the game to navigate his new reality to the fullest. This means that if he graduates quietly, our boy can live a more comfortable life than the one he left behind in his past world. His goal becomes clear: graduation. However, the immediate issue he faces is the enormous tuition fees. While the current semester is likely paid for, he still needs to secure a scholarship for the next one. Looking at his stats, he questions whether he can realistically achieve that. For now, he decides to put the tuition problem aside and focus on the most pressing matters. The essentials for survival, food, clothing, and shelter, take priority. Opening his suitcase, he wonders how he can avoid becoming a bum over the next week. While he has enough clothes, the bigger problems are that he has no place to stay and nothing to eat tonight. Given his character's poor reputation, finding a job isn't an option, and returning to the dorm he was kicked out of is impossible. For the time being, he is stuck in the woods. Fortunately, he discovers a nearby stream, offering a small sense of relief. With 10 days remaining until the start of the semester, Ed decides to prepare himself. He repeatedly casts Wind Blade, training his magic and feeling grateful that his character, despite all its shortcomings, can at least use spells. It intrigues him how quickly his character becomes exhausted after using magic to cut down just 15 tree trunks. Hunger soon follows, and he wonders why he wasn't even fed before being expelled. He realizes that using magic increases his appetite and recalls something his grandfather once told him. When he was young, he used to survive by eating tree bark from the back mountains. Ed decides to put this idea to the test. Using ignition magic, he cooks tree branches, reasoning that any edible food is better than nothing. If one doesn't look too closely, the branches almost resemble chicken breasts. He takes a bite, but immediately vomits. After 3 days of attempting this survival tactic, he grows increasingly frustrated with his grandfather's stories. Starving for 1 day and vomiting for the next 2, he concludes that tree bark is better suited for building houses than for eating. Determined to improve his situation, Ed attempts to construct a shelter. However, he quickly realizes that with only 2 hands, it's impossible to stabilize the 4 supports he needs. Exhausted, he collapses onto the ground but refuses to give up. Bit by bit, he manages to piece together a rudimentary frame for a shelter. He spreads his clothes on the ground to avoid sleeping directly on the dirt. Though it feels like a waste of clothing, he has no other choice. Another day passes, and he finally completes his shelter. A system notification appears, informing him that his creation is finished, a basic wooden shelter. His life skills improve, and he realizes that the crafting system is beginning to open up. Ed starts to understand that, while his character may not excel in magic, he has a surprising aptitude for manual work. As his stomach growls again, he decides to put his new skills to use by crafting a simple harpoon. Determined to eat something proper, he sets out to hunt for food. After 2 days of physical labor and surviving on an empty stomach, he shouldn't even be able to stand, but desperation keeps him moving. Finally, he manages to catch a few fish and uses ignition magic to cook them. For the first time in days, he feels a small sense of relief. With only a week remaining before school resumes, he knows he must endure the hardships as they come. If he can just hold out until then, he'll be able to manage once he's back in the academy. Just as he begins to feel some hope, someone appears. Ed realizes he's been so focused on surviving that he forgot something important. A girl approaches, instantly recognizing Ed Rothtaylor. He remembers her immediately, one of the main characters in the game. She's the very person who had him expelled and ordered him to disappear in front of Princess Phinia. She glares at him and demands to know why he's still here, clearly irritated that he hasn't vanished as instructed. Ed Rothtaylor is a villain who appears at the very beginning of the game. Using his status as a noble, he attempts to flirt with the main character's childhood friend, but only ends up getting punished. However, he doesn't stop there. Filled with a vengeful heart, Ed manipulates the main character's entrance exam for Sylvania Academy. His scheme unravels in court, where he is confronted by a girl who had concealed her identity while taking the entrance exam. Phinia Elias, the third princess of the Klol Empire. Princess Phinia, possessing a special ability to detect lies and conspiracies, exposes Ed's deceit. Reduced to a pathetic state, he tries to make excuses, but all his lies are laid bare under Phinia's piercing insight. After being chased out of the dormitories, Ed Rothtaylor becomes despised by everyone at the academy. His reputation as a dishonorable noble spreads rapidly. Now, in the present, Princess Phinia questions our boy about his presence in the forest. Ed realizes he must face someone he has no business confronting. The princess presses him, asking if he is implying that the academy hasn't properly informed him of his situation. He replies that he is merely a student and points out that, despite this, he has been expelled from his dormitory. Phinia keeps her response curt, telling him to leave. She makes it clear that she cannot tolerate someone as shameless as him lingering around. She threatens him, declaring that she will personally speak to the academic department and request his expulsion for his dishonorable actions as a student and for sabotaging another student's path to a better future. Our boy, however, barely pays attention to her words. Instead, he realizes that his food is burning, food that is extremely precious to him after starving for 3 days. While burned food is a problem, he knows that confronting her is a far greater crisis. After all, she is Phinia, the princess, and she genuinely holds the power to have him expelled from the academy. As the sun begins to set, he mentions that royalty is usually accompanied by heavily armed guards and questions why a noble princess like her is wandering in an isolated forest completely alone. Phinia, taking his comment as a veiled threat, sternly warns him that if he thinks her lack of escorts makes her vulnerable, he will regret underestimating her. Sensing the tension, he quickly clarifies the misunderstanding. He assures her that he has no intention of threatening her and is simply trying to express his gratitude to the princess. She activates her insight skill to determine whether he is being truthful. To her surprise, she finds that he isn't lying this time. This moment of honesty catches her off guard. Meanwhile, our boy reflects on his character's family. While Ed Roth-Taylor's family is famous and influential, to him, they are nothing more than a distant burden, a name and legacy he never truly cared for. It's a corrupt family destined for destruction, with its members likely to face imprisonment. However, now that he's been disowned, our boy realizes that while he may be cold and hungry, it's still better than facing an untimely death alongside them. He decides to persuade Phinia without resorting to deceit. Failure to do so will almost certainly lead to his expulsion, effectively ending the game for him. He recalls that, based on the game's timeline, Ed Roth-Taylor is supposed to be expelled about a week before the semester begins. Turning his attention to the princess, he questions why she is alone in the forest. Observing her lack of an escort and her simple attire, he deduces that she must be completing the class placement test assigned by Professor Glast. The test involves locating magic beads hidden throughout the forest and is infamous for its difficulty. Given her noble status as Princess Phinia, she's undoubtedly aiming for the highest placement. Class A Phinia narrows her eyes, questioning if he's trying to flatter her and accusing him of being as insincere as ever. She briefly wonders whether the academy should have expelled him immediately, sparing her this encounter. Unfazed, our boy presses on, calmly asserting that without his help, she'll never succeed in securing a spot in Class A. To prove his sincerity, he adds that if his words turn out to be false, she can personally ensure his expulsion at any time. He explains that if she heads to the lake in the southeast of the forest, she'll find a small grassy island with a giant tree at its center. This tree, known as Marilda's guardian tree, will hold the gift he has prepared for her. Following his directions, Phinia successfully locates the magic bead. As she examines the bead, she can't help but reflect on the Ed Roth-Taylor she knew just days ago, an undeniable liar and charlatan whose pitiful state still lingers in her memory. Yet, the Ed Roth-Taylor she encountered today felt entirely different, leaving her both confused and intrigued. The class placement test finally concludes, and Professor Glast gathers the students to present the beads they've acquired. Some students produce beads with unique appearances, but the professor sternly announces that all of them will begin in Class F. He emphasizes that understanding the examiner's intent is crucial in a test like this. The objective was not merely to find any magic bead, but to locate one imbued with significant magical power. The professor then declares that only 3 students managed to find beads with exceptional magical energy. He names the first 2 students, Zix and Lortel. Finally, he reveals the student who discovered the bead at Marilda's guardian tree, a bead of extraordinary magical power, placing them at the top of the class. The professor points to Princess Phinia. Meanwhile, our boy, wearing his glasses and watching his burned fish go to waste, is too weak to use the sphere any longer. Left with no choice, he resorts to a rudimentary fishing rod he crafted himself. He reflects on Princess Phinia Elias, recalling that her keen insight was honed from a young age through her ability to see through flattery and sophistry. This talent developed into her innate skill, making her an exceptional judge of character. No one can escape her scrutiny, leaving him with only 2 choices: either provide her with genuine information, which could lead to a significant problem, or attempt to deceive her and face an even greater disaster. He considers the stakes. The proud princess is destined to become known as the Princess of Love, after failing the class placement test and falling to Class F. This failure is meant to serve as the turning point for her character, prompting her personal growth and transformation. However, if she gains considerable influence early in the story by finding the golden bead and entering Class A, the original scenario will collapse. Even if he avoids expulsion, all the knowledge he has from his prior experience with the game will become useless, leaving him in a precarious position. Despite the professor pointing to Phinia, he announces that the top of the class is Lucy Merrill. Our boy breathes a quiet sigh of relief, realizing that the future is still intact. The narrative will proceed as expected, and Phinia will continue her destined journey. Phinia, for her part, realizes that our boy was not lying. She did, after all, find a bead of significant magical power, and her sharp insight confirms his sincerity. He recalls that Phinia had concealed her identity as a princess because she was embarrassed about the special treatment she might receive if her true status were revealed. She wanted to prove herself through her own merit. Although she knew that finding the bead would secure the best results in the test, Phinia ultimately couldn't take it. Claiming the bead wouldn't be an accomplishment she could call her own. The title Princess of Love that she is destined to earn in the future is neither a skill nor a stat. It is a recognition of her character and values. As the class erupts in cheers for Lucy Merrill, who secured the top position, Phinia remains silent. The title of Princess of Love will only come to her by walking a righteous path. Our boy had taunted the princess, confidently claiming she would never enter Class A and challenging her to request his expulsion if he was wrong. Whether his words were true or false ultimately didn't matter. The princess's sharp insight ensured she could always discern the truth. Even though our boy might have believed she would fail the test, Phinia's confidence in her own success had fueled her determination to prove him wrong and savor the moment of victory. However, he chose not to lie. And since Phinia didn't manage to enter Class A, she was left with no grounds to act against him. This realization visibly frustrates her. Irritated and wary, Phinia resolves to keep a close watch on Ed Roththaler, suspecting that there's more to him than meets the eye. He finally manages to catch a fish, and after a few days of surviving in the wilderness, he realizes that his current location requires him to wake up and start running early every morning just to reach the school on time. At last, he returns to Sylvania Academy. The school opening ceremony begins, and the announcer warmly welcomes the students, remarking on the progress they've made before the new semester. He encourages everyone to enjoy the prepared food while listening to the ceremony. Our boy, after days of hardship, hears the sweet whispers of a new beginning welcoming him back. However, all the students around him can't hide their disbelief. They murmur, questioning his audacity to attend the opening ceremony and why he insists on staying at the academy after everything that's happened. Unbothered, he finally enjoys a proper meal, thinking of it as a well-earned reward for his efforts, and decides to savor it slowly. As he eats, the girls nearby recognize him. They exchange glances and begin whispering, making it clear that his presence hasn't gone unnoticed. Ed remains calm, his goal firmly set on graduation. Overhearing their conversation, he catches snippets about how he looked pitiful during the entrance exam, but now seems completely different. Ed has no ambitions beyond graduating, but the students around him continue their chatter. The girls shift their focus to lighter topics, discussing a new dessert created by the academy's head chef and their experiences over the vacation. As they prepare to leave, one of the girls pauses and glances back at him. She furrows her brow, finding it strange. Something about Ed Roththaler feels entirely different. Unmoved by their curiosity, Ed silently wishes for no further disturbances. All he wants now is a quiet path to achieve his one goal: graduation. The first day of school at Sylvania Academy begins, and the teacher is delighted to see the students returning in their newly improved forms this semester. The progress made by the Sylvania Academy community is evident, and the atmosphere buzzes with fresh enthusiasm. However, on the very first day, our boy nearly faces expulsion. He's taken aback to learn that Phinia informed the dean about him. Yet, judging by the old man's amused grin, he suspects she didn't say anything particularly unfavorable. Relieved to have narrowly avoided expulsion, he resolves to tread carefully to ensure the story doesn't deviate from the original plotline. Checking his stats, He notes that his life skills are finely tuned for survival and magical training, attributes well suited for a student specializing in magical security. To fully leverage this combination, he concludes that a bow is the perfect weapon. As his life skills continue to improve, he discovers he can craft high-quality arrows and even incorporate spirit or magic formulas into them, enhancing their effectiveness. While attempting to hunt a bird with his bow, he realizes that advanced spirit formulas, such as those related to summoning or commanding spirits, are still far beyond his current abilities. During this moment, he notices a girl named Janica Failover, a second-year student known as a genius in spirit sorcery. Janica, in turn, notices him as well. Recognizing him from her own sources, she recalls that he is the amusing individual a spirit named Marilda has been talking about. She approaches him and introduces herself, saying that they're in the same year and that he can call her Janica. Our boy is perplexed by how quickly she closed the distance between them. Sensing his confusion, she asks if he's surprised by how much she knows about him. Janica explains that the forest is the domain of Marilda, a high-ranking spirit, and that she has learned a lot about him from Marilda. He is astonished to discover that the master of the forest has been keeping tabs on him. Janica elaborates that Marilda is an inquisitive spirit with her attention spread across the forest, making it inevitable that she would notice an unwelcome visitor. Ed recalls cutting down numerous trees and hunting many animals during his time in the forest, which makes him uneasy. Noticing his reaction, Janica reassures him not to worry about such minor details. She explains that it's part of the natural order for creatures in the forest to hunt and consume one another, and that Marilda isn't bothered by it either. Her words bring him a measure of relief, and he reflects that even the massive wild wolf in the forest might have a gentle heart. Hearing his thoughts, Janica bursts into laughter, calling his observation unexpected. Intrigued by his perspective, she decides to show him something. Smiling, she asks if he finds it endearing, then reveals a spirit she recently contracted with, one she had summoned just yesterday after encountering him. She asks if our boy wants to touch the spirit. Understanding that maintaining a proper response is essential if he wants to get along with Janica, he hesitates. He tells her that he doesn't understand her and admits that he can't see any spirits, which takes her by surprise. Without elaborating, he excuses himself, saying he only came for food and will be leaving now. Our boy, mindful of the original storyline and his information advantage, realizes that Janica plays a significant role in the plot. To avoid disrupting the established events, he resolves not to get too close to her. As she watches him leave, Janica reflects on his peculiar remark about the huge wild wolf having a gentle heart. She agrees with her spirit, Marilda, that he is indeed a fascinating individual. Despite her intrigue, she is certain he genuinely can't see spirits, which only deepens her curiosity about who he truly is. Janica feels disheartened, sensing indifference in his response despite her efforts to be kind. She begins overthinking his actions, wondering what they might mean. Eventually, she calms herself, reasoning that she will likely encounter him again and can uncover more about him later. Meanwhile, our boy finds it increasingly challenging to attend classes. The shelter he built is far from the student area, and the considerable distance takes a toll on him each day. Despite leaving at dawn and running at full speed, he barely makes it to class on time each day. Just by attending school, he feels he's performing an absurd feat that incrementally boosts his stats. To secure a scholarship, however, he knows he must study more diligently. Without money, he resorts to writing on a stone slab with a burnt stick and borrowing books from the student library. On his way back to his shelter, he washes his sweaty clothes, hoping they'll dry by the next morning. Even after this, his tasks are far from over. He checks his supplies to ensure he has enough firewood, drinking water, and jerky for the next day's lunch. These daily responsibilities leave him with only 4 hours of sleep, and despite his exhaustion, something else weighs on his mind: the girl who keeps following him. He wonders how long she plans to trail him and is unsurprised when she reacts with shock, realizing he knew she was there all along. He tells her it would be stranger if he hadn't noticed her presence. With a direct tone, he makes it clear: "I'm Ed Rothdailer, the worst hooligan to exist. Why do you keep hanging around me?" Janica doesn't flinch at his words. She thinks to herself that these are merely others' judgments of him, and that she doesn't know who he truly is yet. Smiling calmly, she watches him. As he looks at her, he recalls that while Janica might seem naive or foolish at first glance, she is actually deeply independent and strong-willed. However, knowing what lies ahead for her, he can't bring himself to respond to her with a cheerful smile. This hesitation stems from one undeniable fact. Janica Failover is the final boss of Act 1. She is the only character who would smile at a scoundrel like Ed Roththaler, and that thought lingers heavily in his mind. Trying to convince himself that he's still a villain, our boy decides to take advantage of their meeting. Though he doesn't truly want to go this far, he ultimately asks her for a favor, reasoning that fate brought them together. Janica's face lights up with excitement at the mention of a favor. He explains his situation, how he's been disowned by his family, is struggling to make ends meet, and desperately needs help. Without hesitation, he asks if she can lend him some money. Her initial shock is evident, but he continues, insisting that he will definitely repay her, as that's what friends are for. He assures her it would only be a temporary loan. As she hesitates, our boy reflects on her circumstances. He knows that Janica receives a scholarship every year for being at the top of her class. This recognition isn't just a testament to her brilliance, it's a necessity. Coming from a poor background, she relies entirely on the scholarship to remain enrolled and advance to higher grades at Sylvania Academy. Without it, she wouldn't be able to continue her education. She's just a rancher's daughter, and her greatest weakness is money. Janica remains silent, clearly conflicted. After a moment, she apologizes softly, leaving him alone with his thoughts. 2 days later, he reflects on the situation with Janica, feeling uneasy but resolute in his decision to avoid getting too involved with important characters. To prevent disrupting the story or deviating from the original plot, he resolves to tread carefully. Returning to the small wooden frame he calls home, he is surprised to find someone inside. This is no ordinary visitor. In terms of significance, she holds an even greater presence than Janica. Admired by classmates and even professors, Lucy Merrill is a rare genius and the most powerful character among the failed swordsmen of Sylvania. To his shock, she is sleeping peacefully inside his shelter. After she wakes up, he bluntly asks why she is sleeping there. He's baffled as to what someone of her stature is doing in the mountain valley. Lucy, unfazed, groans and complains about the noise, saying it's making it difficult for her to sleep. Confused, he asks what she's referring to. She nonchalantly points to the enormous wolf nearby, so large it's practically the size of a house, and says it keeps talking to him. Lucy, with her usual calm yet cryptic demeanor, informs him that the spirit accompanying the wolf has a message for him. It's simple yet troubling. Someday, he must save Janica, no matter what the cost. Lucy stayed at the camp for only 2 days, and once she left, our boy returned to his routine, wondering if their encounter would lead to anything significant. It didn't take him long to realize how naive that thought was. Joint combat training begins, and the training hall buzzes with excitement. The audience is thrilled, eagerly anticipating the matches. Ed understands that joint combat training is essentially a mock one-on-one combat exercise. To minimize lethality, the combat students primarily use simulated magic. The participants are an impressive lineup of talents: Princess Phenia, the Golden Daughter Lortel, Spirit Sorcerer Janica, and the perpetually indolent Lucy. The list of extraordinary individuals seems endless. Even so, the most important figure is none other than the protagonist of the story, the failing swordsman, Taylor. Our boy feels a surge of excitement as Taylor's match begins. Already knowing the outcomes of these events, he hadn't paid much attention to the other contests, as the victors of the duels in the joint combat training episode were all first-year students like Taylor, with one notable exception. As he watches, Janica greets him with her usual cheerful energy, running up to him as if nothing had happened. Ed is amazed that, despite the awkwardness of his previous request for money, she remains as upbeat and friendly as ever. Janica informs him that the list of matches has been released, and he can't help but notice how different she is from someone like Lucy. When he dismissively tells her he isn't interested, she asks with a wagging persistence if he's not even curious about his own match. Her words catch him off guard, and he's shocked to realize that he has to fight as well. This was unexpected, as his character in the original storyline would have been expelled by now. He anxiously questions who his opponent will be, and Janica shows him the list. While scanning it, his attention shifts to the protagonist, Taylor, who seems determined to perform at their very best. In that moment, our boy resolves to focus on the main character, thinking that nothing else matters. This world, once beyond the screen, feels strikingly real. Having lived as Taylor through countless playthroughs, he knows the hardships that await. From miserable, vain bad endings to true endings that left lasting impressions, he's experienced every path Taylor could take, paths that were all grueling and challenging. Despite his decision to focus on his own survival, a part of him can't help but silently root for the protagonist, Taylor. As the announcer calls out for a student named Lucy, our boy looks around, wondering where she disappeared to. Lucy finally joins the duel. As the top student of the class, Lucy Merrill is pitted against Taylor McClure. Taylor readies himself for the fight, and our boy recalls a key aspect of the protagonist. The hero of this world is destined to be a swordsman. Despite having never wielded a sword before in his life, Taylor's very first swing is enough to cut through Lucy's lightning-quick magic. Lucy, confident that her spell would strike true, is caught off guard when it's effortlessly blocked. As Taylor closes the gap between them, the momentary surprise causes Lucy to reflexively cast Lightning Strike, an intermediate-level lightning spell. Though Taylor is completely overpowered by the sudden surge of magic, Lucy is immediately disqualified for using an advanced spell beyond the rules of the duel. This earns Taylor the distinction of being the first to defeat Lucy, an event our boy remembers as a legendary scene in the original storyline. Despite the nostalgia, he pulls his focus back to the present match. As the battle begins, Taylor charges at Lucy with unwavering determination, but she effortlessly slams him into the wall with a single burst of her overwhelming magic. The audience falls silent, stunned by the sheer difference in their abilities. Meanwhile, Lucy lets out a casual yawn, completely unfazed by the duel. Everyone watching understands that the match is already over. Defeating someone at the top of the class, especially someone like Lucy Merrill, is a near-impossible feat. The students murmur among themselves, questioning the point of attacking an adept mage like Lucy barehanded. Our boy reflects on the hero's journey, remembering that Taylor's life was always a series of grueling trials. Born a country bumpkin, a failed student, and an underachiever who had never earned a single decent grade since starting school, Taylor was someone who was rarely acknowledged. Despite this, he faced every challenge head-on, even as others jumped to conclusions about his capabilities. In the face of an outright demoralizing situation, where students pitted him and the odds seemed insurmountable, Taylor never lost hope. Watching this resolve, our boy feels a spark of joy. Seeing the hero rise again, he silently cheers him on, believing Taylor can overcome this as he has so many times before. Taylor picks up his sword once more and charges at Lucy with unyielding determination. Ed fully expects Lucy to use her signature lightning magic, but to his astonishment, she defends herself with wind magic instead. With a single, devastating magic tornado, she sends Taylor flying, leaving the audience in shock. Ed is taken aback, not only by Lucy's unexpected use of wind magic, but by how easily she overpowered the protagonist. As Lucy stands victorious, the crowd erupts into cheers for her, while Taylor collapses from exhaustion and loses consciousness. Our boy stands there, stunned. He never expected to see the hero of the story lose.